presented as uneducated, drunken and irresponsible. And they tried to drive the Abbey players out of the country. The resulting publicity made the name of the Abbey famous. What lay ahead? The tours to America came to an abrupt end with the World War of 1914. But it was events at home which were to bring war to the Abbey's door and threaten its very existence.
This land of ours is writ in its patriots' blood. There'd be many a long page bearing the honoured name of Sean Curran. I'll die happy.
You'll die heavy.
I've always thought that the Abbey Theatre had more effect on the Irish national political movement than it's given credit for. See, I was in classes at the Abbey Theatre in the years 1913 and 14. Indeed, I think I started in 1912. We used to attend the plays that were shown. And sometimes when certain things, say like Yeats' Kathleen O'Houlihan, or Lady Gregory's The Rising of the Moon, or Norris Connell's little play called The Imaginary Conversation, when they were shown, the effect, the thrilling effect it had on us young people who were thinking of Ireland as a nation was just unbelievable.
Yeats believed that politics should be kept out of the theatre. His own patriotic play, Kathleen O'Houlihan, was written unconsciously out of a dream. The play undoubtedly had a very powerful emotional effect on the generation which produced the leaders of 1916. And at the time, moderate nationalists were appalled. Yeats, years later, was to ask himself if that play of mine caused people to go to their deaths. People like Sean Connolly, a member of the Abbey staff.
Insurrection of 1916 caused buildings all around the Abbey to be destroyed. There wasn't anything standing in Abbey Street, O'Connell Street, and Yeats was in London. He phoned the then manager of the theatre, the playwright, St. John Irvine, and said, I suppose the Abbey is no more. And I told St. John Irvine, as a matter of fact, he says, I cursed the British gunners for their incompetence, he said. And if I'd known they were going to miss the Abbey, I'd have come down, he says, on that Easter Monday morning and set fire to the place myself. In the event, there was only one pane of glass broken in the Abbey over the pit door entrance. It stood amid the carnage, and Yeats is supposed to have said, and that is the whole policy of the Abbey Theatre. It's on the sidelines, it observes, never gets involved.
I remember my mother telling me that there's one night there was rather a lot of shooting going on, and she thought it'd be nice to come back in the tram and come back quick. But Lady Gregory wasn't going to have any of this. She said, no, certainly not. We would walk back. So we walked back through the bullets flying around the place. They did.
From 1918 on, when you had the War of Independence, the curfew was in place and the theatre was often closed, and very few new plays were being written. So it wasn't really until Sean O'Casey appeared in 1923 with The Shadow of a Gunman that the theatre could revive, and was revived and saved from bankruptcy.
Mr. Shields, are you awake? Mr. Shields, are you going to get up today at all? Are there any use calling you, Mr. Shields? This is a nice 9 o'clock. Do you know what time it is, Mr. Shields?
Yes!
Well, why don't you get up then and stop turning the house into a bedlam trying to waken you?
All right.
Why, these old ones ball at a body. On me soul, I'm beginning to believe the Irish people is still in the Stone Age.
Sean O'Casey, you might say, arrived from nowhere. He had submitted several plays to the Abbey, and believe it or not, the Abbey lost 2 of them, couldn't find them. And then he came with a play called On the Run. Lady Gregory said to him, look, Mr. O'Casey, life is not about evil, black capitalists and wonderfully upright, heroic workers. It's in grey, it's not in black and white like that. So go back home and write of what you know. Your gift is characterization and dialogue. So go back and write of what you know of Dublin life. Whereupon he did so and brought On the Run.
He came in 1923 with The Shadow of a Gunman and followed that in 1924 with Juno and the Paycock, many regard as his finest play. And new audiences had come to see these plays and packed out the theatre night after night after night, and queues were forming outside the theatre to Lady Gregory's great joy, and she brought Sean O'Casey out to see this queue and told him that she hadn't seen a queue outside the Abbey for so long that it was a miracle to her.
Mother of God, have pity on the pair of us. Oh, Blessed Virgin, where were you when my darling son was riddled with bullets? When my darling son was riddled with bullets.
Oh, Sacred Heart of Jesus, take away our hearts of stone and give us hearts of flesh. Take away this murderous hate and give us thine own eternal love.
O'Casey, being a city rat, as Behan called him, was writing plays about the tenements and about the poor in Dublin, a class apart from Singh's peasantry. And he was writing about them in their own environment, using their own language, their own dialect, if you will, the Dublin dialect.
Jammed as I was in the crowd, I listened to the speeches pattering on the people's heads like rain falling on the corn, and every derogatory thought went out of my head, and I said to myself, you can die now, Fruiter. When you've seen the shattered dreams of the past leaping to life in the bodies of living men, that shows if we were without a titter of courage for centuries, or vice versa now. Hey, you see them veins? The blood was boiling in them.
Later on, then, 1926, came The Flower and the Stars, and that really caused a riot. So much so that the actors were in danger because the audience tried to invade the stage. Difficult because the stage was quite high and they'd have to clamber over the instruments in the orchestra. But several of them tried to do that and flung things.
I was standing sort of backstage in one of the doors of the entrances onto the stage when suddenly he appeared and walked across the stage, and there was an absolute uproar going on outside.
You have disgraced yourselves again! Hold your way! You have on these boards tonight the work of a great Irish genius, and you have rejected it! As in the past, you have rejected other works by other great men.
And then when the roaring became worse and they shouted out against O'Casey, he roared out at them with all the venom and vehemence that was in the great man. He shouted out at them, "This is O'Casey's apotheosis." I wonder, did those that were listening to him, Barry, understand what the meaning of apotheosis was? Did you?
I'm not answering that question.
Did you understand?
No, of course I didn't.
You didn't? Well, neither did I.
We believe in God, and we believe in thee.
Tackle those who are sheltered with disease, and women labouring with child, and children that play about the streets, with the blood of youth expiring in its prime.
We believe in God, and we believe in thee. The enemy's broken through, broken through, broken through. Every man born a woman to the guns, to the guns, to the guns, to the guns, to the guns.
The Silver Tassie is a very, very, very powerful play, and it was experimental. Second act in particular, with the chanting, the plain chant, and the scene in the trenches, sent it to Yeats, and Yeats rejected it. So of course they reckoned without O'Casey's well-known crankiness and temper. He flared back at them, and a controversy started. And the unfortunate thing about it was that O'Casey never again submitted a play to the Abbey.
And he was wildly excited. He saw this Abbey Theatre letter. He was anything but excited when he opened it, because it was Yeats's letter rejecting the play. Lady Gregory wrote to Sean saying that they had made a big mistake in not taking the play for the Abbey. They would never have been able to do it on the scale it was, but they certainly should have taken it. And that again, and she begged of Sean to see her, but he was so peeved and upset and that he didn't see her, and he did so regret that till the day he died, that he didn't see her then.
From October 1931 to June 1935, the Abbey Company spent most of its time touring America. They played in small towns first, and then moved on to the bigger cities. This is Dennis O'Dea. F.J. McCormick and his wife Eileen Crowe. Character actress Maureen Delaney. May Craig, Eileen and F.J. again. The Irish-American objections were muted this time. They didn't throw potatoes at the actors, but they did have their say.
A newspaper somewhere in the Middle West, I think it was, accused the players of not being Irish at all, because the man who wrote this article said that not one of the men had a caubeen and not one of the women wore a red petticoat, so he didn't believe we were Irish at all.
The Abbey actors were celebrated in America and were invited by John Ford to play leading roles in his feature film version of The Plough and the Stars. The company at this time included Eric Gorman, Rhea Mooney, and the notable character actors F.J. McCormick, Barry Fitzgerald, and M.J. Dolan. McCormick was considered the greatest actor of his generation. His real name was Peter Judge, but he liked the sound of F.J. McCormick. He was born in 1890 and joined the Abbey in 1918 after a brief career as a civil servant. Over the next 30 years, he appeared in over 500 plays in roles as diverse as Oedipus the King and Joxer in Juno and the Paycock.
Two cities sent me over with a fabulous amount of money to be paid to him each year just for his exclusive services. That was number one. Number two was that he would get £100 a day, and number three was that he could have his choice of scripts. And here McCormick said, and the first thing I brought over to him was Odd Man Out. I brought it to him, and he read it that night, and he phoned me up. He didn't even wait till the next morning. He phoned me up in the middle of the night. He said, I'd love to do this picture.
A fella was telling me, I hear tell that His Reverence the Pope is queer and rich.
Blather.
Is that a fact?
It is just blather.
Aye, well then, how do you suggest that we should settle this matter decently?
If you like, I try to inspire in you a precious particle of faith.
Faith? Would it, pay the rent for me and help me to get a pint of stout now and then?
It's fascinating to watch F.J. McCormick in Odd Man Out. I mean, he was wonderful physically. I mean, the scenes where in the snow where he's nearly hit by the car, it's like a ballet dancer. He's a magnificent physique, beautiful mover.
Look out where you're going!
In 1947, shortly after appearing in this film, F.J. died. He was 57. Out of loyalty to the Abbey, he had resisted the temptation of money, fame and Hollywood, unlike his great friend Barry Fitzgerald, a lovable character actor who was to become a star in films and win an Oscar in 1944.
Now, if you've anything to say it to Plutarch. And let me tell you that you're not going to be pass remarkable to any lady in my
company.
Now, easy with them hands, easy with them hands. You're taking a bit of a risk when you start to paw the Colby.
Come on, men of the
Yeats's effort in establishing the Abbey, as well as his own writing in poetry, prose and drama, had won him an international reputation. He was recognised as being a great poet, and when he himself won the Nobel Prize for Literature, the reflected glory did no harm at all to the Abbey. So it was at this point in 1924, Yeats, who was then getting tired, having returned to Dublin from London, and who had taken up the honour of being a senator in the new Free State, really wanted to back off from his responsibilities in the Abbey. So he and Lady Gregory got the idea of offering the theatre to the new Free State.
I had always been a regular Abbey theatre goer, and in 1924, Yeats and Lady Gregory called on me when I was Minister for Finance and told me that they had come to present the Abbey Theatre to the government, that they could no longer carry on. The theatre had never paid its way, and now that there was an Irish state in existence, an Irish government, they felt that they couldn't go on begging missions to England anymore.
Well, Ernest panicked a bit when he heard that. As he told me afterwards, he had visions of dialogue, of discussions going on to the small hours of the morning in the Dáil as to what play will be put on next Monday night and who will be playing the principal parts. And he shied a bit at that, but he said they wouldn't take possession of the theatre, no. But what they would do is they would give the theatre an annual subsidy. The first one would be in the region of £850. That was in 1924. It has grown steadily since then, and it was, apart from the money itself, it was an assurance that the theatre, as a national theatre, had the support of whatever government was in power.
The Abbey had now become the first subsidised theatre in the English-speaking world. By the end of the 20s, both Lady Gregory and Yeats were becoming old. Lady Gregory died in her 80th year in 1932. Yeats survived Lady Gregory by 7 years, but his involvement in the Abbey in the 1930s was not great. He was in poor health and lived mainly in Italy, but he was loyal to the Abbey and was very concerned about the reorganisation of the board of directors. He didn't want to give up power and always tried to be present for the important meetings, and he presented his later plays there too. But to his amazement, the board considered his play The Heron's Egg blasphemous, and with regret rejected it. When his final play, Purgatory, caused a clerical uproar because of its concept of purgatory, he retreated to the south of France, where he had a sudden premonition that something dreadful was about to befall the Abbey. He wrote to the writer Frank O'Connor, telling him of his premonition. But before O'Connor could reply, Yeats had died on January 28, 1939, on the French Riviera.
The Ireland that we dreamed of would be the home of a people who valued material wealth only as a basis for right living. A land whose countryside would be bright with cosy homesteads, whose fields and villages would be joyous with the sounds of industry, with the romping of sturdy children, the contests of athletic youth, and the laughter of happy maidens.
When Blythe left the government, by the way, because he had cut his shilling off the old age pension the Saturday before the election, I think, and lost Fine Gael the government for about a decade. But he thought it'd be a good idea to bring Blythe in, because he'll be, as Minister of Finance, he must be a good businessman. That was the kind of thinking. And Blythe, over the next few years, managed to let everyone kill themselves. I mean, in their relationships on the board, and one by one the board members left and Blythe stayed on, and eventually he had the whole Abbey in his hands.
When I went into the Abbey was his fiefdom. He'd become managing director in 1941. By 54, he was everything. He was managing director, he was artistic director, he made every decision, what plays were done, who was fired, who was sacked.
one shouldn't look to ex-ministers of finance, frankly, to run national theatres. But in this extraordinary way, he managed, within a very short space of time, to completely take over the theatre.
I got on very well with Blythe, I must say. He was very honest in his outlook, very down to earth. He would come to a dress rehearsal, say, and put his finger on something that you had overlooked, and which he saw, and
sometimes realistic, sometimes stretching the use of language.
Hakan far more has spoken in respiratory disaster, in ras kasakti.
But sometimes capture that appeal to the senses and the intellect, which would have pleased Yeats very much. The production of the barbaric comedies by Spanish writer Ramon Valla Inclán, directed by Catalan director Calixto Bieto, was co-produced with the Edinburgh Festival. People objected publicly to this play, calling it ribald and salacious. Actors were threatened and extra security employed. But it won major theatrical awards in that season. Hinterland by Sebastian Barry dealt with recent events in Irish political life, the story of the High administration. It quickly moved from the arts to the news pages.
I felt, that there had been quite a lot of criticism of the Abbey in the past, about the Abbey not being relevant or the Abbey not doing things which were trying to tackle subjects which were very much of today. And here we were doing precisely that and being criticised for that. So I sort of had a very strong feeling of, well, you're sort of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
So to me, the twin achievements of the Abbey are the development of writers, the creation of an Irish repertoire that has, from the beginning of its time, almost 100 years ago, to now, given most of the great plays of the Irish repertoire have come through the Abbey. And at the same time, a host of actors of quality, of ability, charismatic figures who have gone on from the Abbey and done other things like film, television, played in other places. And that mixture of really good acting and interesting writing, those are the achievements over the 100 years that the Abbey, I think, has to show the world.
There was a sense in the time when it was founded that there was something important that needed to be reinstated, something about the spirit of Irish people that had been lost, and that you weren't really going to have any opportunity to do anything that was of value in your own country. Well, when Yeats, Lady Gregory and Synge took on that idea, it was to make something happen here. And there was a real ferment, I think.
Maybe theatre isn't useful except in a kind of revolutionary situation. Maybe when Yeats was running it, you could throw all the balls in the air and say, what's going to happen? What do we want this nation to be? It could be anything. Then, after 1922, of course, it became very restricted. It could only become one thing, and it became it fairly successfully. But basically, it was closed for business. The theatre, which reflected that, was also closed for business.
I think the important thing for the Abbey is that it must be a theatre that is important for today. The artistic policy of the theatre has to use the tradition, the glorious tradition of the theatre, not to hark back to it, but to use it as a springboard into the future.
People forget that Yeats also said that we shouldn't just be examining the surfaces, we should be questioning, we should be challenging, we should be, sort of turning over the sod and seeing the maggots underneath and having a look at them.
I think that the Fountain Duo's intentions have been well realised. I think they did provide a forum for Irish actors to stay at home, to write serious plays, to write eloquent plays, to write demanding plays. I think that they are to be congratulated for their lack of tyranny in embracing the great challenges presented by Synge and O'Casey. But now it's time for the theatre to move further on. Now is the time, I think, for looking at that manifesto and saying, well, we've done that, now what do we do? It's now time really for it to embrace the unknown.
There is a sort of quality of life that is at the heart of the city, of the capital city, which is a quality of imaginal life, the life of the imagination. And Yeats's thing was very shrewd. He doesn't put at the heart of the state a parliament or a bank. He puts a theatre at the heart of the state, because he says, as a great poet and as a great artist, he says, any state that is based on economics alone is a prison house. A new state must have room for the imagination. And that is the Abbey Theatre, and that is the role of the Abbey Theatre as the National Theatre of Ireland, to be, if you like, the imagination of the nation, that it's an animating place, that it's a place that actually expresses completely different values, non-materialist values, however much it's rooted in material concerns. And I think as long as we hold on to that, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, as long as we hold on to that, then we'll be okay, and then I think the Abbey will be okay. If we lose contact with that, then I think it's all over. Well, it's not worth it anymore.